Greg Olson's dream is to fly all the way to outer space.
I see this big blue sphere receding. It was awe-inspiring.
Stage separation complete.
He's paid $20 million US.
Booster ignition and liftoff.
To spend 10 extraordinary days in orbit.
It's good to be here. Whoa!
Greg has spent years inside the Russian space program. Now, from the busiest launch pad on the planet to a platform in space and back to Earth in the life and death drama of re-entry, we go inside the ride of a lifetime.
Sensor main.
If you want to catch a rocket into outer space, this is the place to go. More people go into space from here than any other place on Earth, 10 to 15 launches per year. It's a patch of desert in central Kazakhstan called the Baikonur Cosmodrome. For 50 years, dogs, apes, satellites, and cosmonauts have rocketed into space from this spot. Now, for only the third time in history, a paying customer will enter orbit. In just 3 days' time, a spacecraft called Soyuz is due to lift off, bound for the International Space Station. On board will be a Russian cosmonaut, a NASA astronaut, and Greg Olson. The first two ride for free. It's their job. But Greg's going along for the thrill, and he's paying $20 million US for the privilege. The time to launch is T-minus 72 hours, and counting.
Attention, comrades. Here's the work plan for today, product number 017.
3 kilometers from the launch pad, in a vast hangar, a giant Soyuz rocket is about to be bolted together. Sergei Obukov heads an assembly team that now has 12 hours to put the Soyuz together. Any longer, and the launch could be abandoned.
During the assembly, all my commands are very short, but the people here know what's expected of them, and they know what they have to do.
The most critical job is attaching an emergency escape rocket. No other space program uses one, but when things go wrong, this rescue missile is a lifeline. And things do sometimes go wrong. On the 26th of September 1983, a Soyuz was about to lift off. Then something went terribly wrong.
There was an accident at the launch pad, a fire and explosion of the rocket.
The fireball headed towards the capsule and its two-man crew. The escape rocket fired, lifting the capsule and the two men inside to safety.
So one time in history, this escape rocket played its part, one time, and I hope to God that we never have to use it again.
The rescue pod must be exactly straight, fitted to within half a hair's breadth. If it isn't, it could end up killing the people it's meant to save. The technicians have been working for 3 hours, but they still can't get the rocket to line up.
What measurement do you have?
Sergei's numbers don't add up.
You have a different measurement every time. How is that possible?
There is absolutely no margin for error. Sergei Obukov holds lives in his hands. These men's lives. Bill MacArthur, a US NASA astronaut and Expedition 12's commander. Cosmonaut Valery Tokarev, the flight engineer. And the $20 million man, Greg Olson.
I will feel most relaxed and most happy.
60-year-old Brooklyn-born Olson is a laser scientist, an entrepreneur, and a grandfather. He is not a tourist.
The term space tourist implies, well, you write a check and you go for a joyride. And believe me, that was not the case at all.
Greg's worked hard to get this far, training for 2 years with the Russian Space Agency. As part of his course, he had zero-gravity training. The zero-G chamber is located in a refitted Russian jumbo jet. Sudden dives and climbs reduce gravity for 25 seconds at a time.
As you stand in the plane, all of a sudden you feel yourself lifted up. They were to see how you behave and so on. Well, I think I discovered on the zero-G flight that I really liked this stuff, that I didn't think I was subject to motion sickness, and that I was going to like space.
But Greg's physical condition has cast a shadow over the mission. He's been scratched from one mission already because of respiratory problems, and it looks as though this one might also leave without him.
I feel dizzy, but I don't. I want to make sure that I am not a liability to the crew, if anything, an asset.
The main goal of training is to be fit for re-entry. Russian capsules land violently, so to ease the blow, crews ride in custom-cast seats. Techniques like this have been used here for 50 years. Russia's cosmonauts have gone into space and returned alive with more success than those of any other nation. But right now, no one rides this rocket out of Baikonur Cosmodrome until Sergei Obukov says they can. His team is still trying to fit the rescue rocket onto Soyuz. The clock is ticking, but Sergei won't be rushed.
I'm not watching the time. It's not about working fast. It's about working well. I have to be absolutely sure that everything is done right, so the crew is safe.
Dawn on the day before launch. The hangar doors open to reveal more than 20 tons of rocket, 12 stories high. For those who'll ride this bullet, it's an awe-inspiring sight.
My concern in the past was that I might be nervous or fearful. It must be the same kind of feeling that men who actually go into battle have before the battle. Am I going to be scared when this rocket is actually taking off?
The Russian Soyuz rocket starts its journey into space as rail freight. The launch site, Baikonur, is in the middle of nowhere. Mission control lies over 2,000 kilometers to the east, in Moscow. This is the domain of the man who runs every Russian launch to the International Space Station. Lead flight director Vladimir Solovyov knows how it feels to fly in space. He was a cosmonaut from 1978 to 1986. He'll be in command as Expedition 12 takes flight. This spacecraft is expected to travel around 33,000 kilometers per hour. But right now, it's traveling just over 2 kilometers per hour. This same journey has been made by over 1,500 rockets before. Until 1955, this was a military site. That changed when Baikonur launched Sputnik, the football-sized satellite that began the space race. Soon afterwards, Yuri Gagarin left here to become the first man in space. He rode a rocket so reliable that the design is practically the same as that of the vehicle traveling through the Kazakh desert today. At 9 a.m., the rocket reaches the launch pad. Liftoff will be in 24 hours. The men who'll be aboard complete a few last Earthbound routines.
Okay, smile. Yeah, we're happy. We just got in our spaceship.
Greg's training is finally over.
I put in well over 900 hours of training. I had to pass a series of tests and gates. As the time is getting closer to the launch, thinking, this really might be happening now.
At the pad, hydraulics hoist Soyuz into firing position. Right now it weighs around 23 tons, but soon it'll take on a further 300 tons of fuel.
Let the cosmonauts fly. Let them be alive and well, and let them return to Earth alive and well.
In 20 hours, I will feel very good. Our safety is the #1 goal of all people in the Russian space program.
Service towers grip Soyuz, fitting the rocket into a 500-ton clamp that ensures it's aimed straight. Igor Barmin is Baikonur's launchpad director.
I'm standing on the support ring. It moves around. We move the whole launch system around, including the rocket, to put it in the best position for firing.
Igor orders fueling to begin.
Right now, we're fueling the first stage of the rocket with liquid oxygen, kerosene, highly concentrated hydrogen peroxide, and nitrogen.
Керосин, высококонцентрированная перекись водорода, подается азот.
It's a volatile mix. In 1980, as another rocket was fueling up, a booster rocket exploded. Within a few minutes, 48 people had died. Launch is less than 5 hours away. Valery Tokarev, Bill MacArthur, and Greg Olson get their final medical checks. No more visitors are allowed. It's now medical staff and cleared officials only. The slightest hint of illness, and these men will be off the flight.
Every time I see a guy in a white coat, I feel these little trepidations because I know there's something this might do to take my dream away from me.
The rocket's fuel tanks are full. Soyuz is ready for takeoff. At Mission Control in Moscow, Vladimir Solovyov and his team run pre-launch checks.
Every flight, every mission to space is a very risky business. Space is a very aggressive environment, and there's the constant threat that something may go wrong. We've got to be ready for that moment if it happens.
Expedition 12 is ready to go.
Feeling really, getting more and more relaxed as we get closer.
Greg Olson is about to learn if he has what it takes. The key to membership in one of the world's most exclusive clubs.
I never felt and I never will feel I am a cosmonaut or an astronaut. I have far too much respect for the training these guys go through. It's a small club, and I'm thinking as I'm getting into the vehicle that, hey, I'm really going to do this. As I'm walking the stairs, I don't feel fearful. This is great.
По докладу командира экипажа, экипаж к старту готов.
Хотя проверки.
The checks are being done in Baikonur. They're checking the rocket, they're checking the spaceship. We're at 2 hours, and so far, everything looks good.
Пока все в порядке, все в порядке.
The spacesuits are checked one last time. If Soyuz should spring a leak, these suits will be all that stands between the crew and the lethal vacuum of deep space.
Вот сейчас вот космонавт.
Checking the cosmonaut suits for air tightness is a very important check. If something's wrong with the spacesuits, the launch will have to be delayed.
Если вдруг что-то не так с скафандрами, то, в общем-то, как правило, старт надо откладывать. Он ведь набирает очень медленно. Здесь, по-моему, 15%. Тяга больше.
The suits are good to go. Now the action steps into high gear. Crews arm the emergency pod. The service towers retract. Dawn breaks in Moscow. Millions of people are just starting their workday.
Стартовой готовности.
But mission control has already been buzzing for hours. It's now just 15 minutes to launch.
Стартовая подготовка находится в полном соответствии с графиком. Экипаж доложил, что герметичность скафандров в норме.
The world tunes in to watch the historic event.
The 2-day trip from Earth to the space station is grueling.
Завершена эвакуация всех специалистов боевых расчетов со стартовой позиции.
Дренаж на
We're going flying in 2 minutes.
Через 2 минуты полетим.
The wait is nearly over, but there's still time for things to go wrong. Sergei Obukov never stops worrying.
Чувство удовлетворения бывает, когда...
There's tension until I hear the announcement on launch day that the spaceship has separated from the rocket. There's tension. Only when I hear that can I say, that's it, my job is done.
60 seconds to launch. The system goes onto automatic.
Выдана команда «Ключ на старт».
At this point, the launch can't be stopped. "40 seconds. The last towers drop away. Soyuz is now standing under its own power.
Есть команда «Пуск», бортовое питание,
20
зажигание
seconds.
кислород.
Боковухи отвалились.
In the empty Kazakh desert. And in the heart of mission control, time seems to stand still.
Зажигание кислород.
Done. T-minus 13 seconds, and that the second umbilical tower moving away from the Soyuz. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Vibration. Intermediate. Booster ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of the Soyuz rocket transporting William MacArthur, Valery Tuporev, and Gregory Olson to their microgravity home in space.
At first, the takeoff almost appears to be in slow motion.
40 seconds, not on flight.
Tons of fuel ignite in Soyuz's engines.
Doing well. Nominal flight.
After a minute, it's traveling at nearly 2,000 kilometers an hour.
The network parameters are nominal. Operating nominally. The crew is doing well. Some vibration. Copy.
2 minutes into the flight, charges blow loose the 4 booster rockets. At this point, the escape unit is of no use. It's also been jettisoned. The lighter Soyuz now reaches more than 33,000 kilometers an hour.
I tried to lift my arm, and I felt like I had a 10-pound weight, the push against this weight to lift it up. Then I knew, I said, yeah, we're really accelerating.
Soon they get the signal that they're in space. A figurine that was left loose in the capsule begins to float.
When you go into orbit, and that's a big moment, we have a little doll. This thing hangs and swings around in a cabinet, and when you see it start floating, then you know you're in orbit.
Еще раз напоминаю, 8:25, выдать команду Женя 7.
9 minutes after liftoff, Soyuz begins its orbit of the Earth. Its electronics are boosted by solar panels. Greg Olson is more than 200 kilometers from his home planet. His dream has become a reality, but it's not all plain sailing. The first job is an air check. The riggers of launch could have loosened seals in the capsule or the adjoining utility module.
Pressure accepted. No changes.
Разрешаем открыть гермошлемы.
Are we given permission to unseal the helmets?
Открываем гермошлемы.
You can open your helmets.
Это понятно.
We've checked for airtightness, and everything's airtight, thank God. Once we figured the capsule was airtight, I gave them permission to open the hatch into the utility compartment, where they can take off the spacesuits, clean up, and change, then have lunch and dinner at the same time.
As we're in the habitat module, I'm feeling, wow, I'm one of the guys. I'm not an astronaut, I'm not a cosmonaut, but I'm a space guy. And here we are about to, we're going to open some food and have a juice. And, it's just great.
Once they've finished snacking, the spacemen will embark upon their first assignment. They're to steer a course further out, around 350 kilometers from Earth. Their destination is the International Space Station, the human race's only permanent presence in space. It's currently staffed by Russian Sergei Krikolyov and John Phillips from NASA. After 6 months on duty, they're ready to come home. To relieve them, the incoming crew must chase the station through space and gently dock onto its hull.
You can see the International Space Station on the far right of the
Soyuz spends 3 days and covers nearly 1.5 million kilometers as it slowly narrows the gap. But this is where things get interesting. Their encounter seems to occur in slow motion, but only because both vehicles are traveling near the same mind-boggling speed. Docking to the space station is literally rocket science, requiring a mathematical precision that could mean the difference between life and death. Computers are in control, but they can't guarantee against mishaps. On the 25th of June 1997, an unmanned Russian supply ship, the Progress, approached the Mir space station. Three cosmonauts were aboard Mir. Suddenly, Progress swerved, slamming into the space station and puncturing its hull. Mir's cabin pressure plummeted. The crew scrambled to seal off the damaged bulkhead and only just managed to avert disaster. Eight years later, Soyuz is trying to dock at another space station.
We copy.
Millimeter by millimeter.
The crosshair is a little lower, but on Vesca periscope, it's aligned pretty good.
Closer and closer.
7, the crosshairs are aligned. Excellent. Verify contact. We copy. Range 4. Range rate 0.15. Range 3, 2.
Finally, they succeed. A perfect docking. Greg's crewmates have arrived at what will be their home for the next 6 months, if they can open the hatch.
I mean, we're here and we're pulling on this hatch and it won't come loose. Is this going to be it? We're going to have to turn around and come back because we can't open the hatch? Finally got it to open up. Krikalev and Phillips had opened their hatch.
Привет. It's good to be here. Whoa. Very interesting. Expedition 12 arriving. Good to see you, bro. Hey, man. You know, I need some.
It's a successful moment. We're all hugging each other.
Hey, good to see you. We got patches just coming off everywhere. Hey, see you.
Greg may not call himself a tourist, but he still travels with a video camera.
Yeah, I met you last year, didn't I?
For his 20 million, Greg gets to spend 7 more days in the void, and he plans to record as much of it as he can before riding home with the outbound space station crew.
Breakfast time on Tuesday.
On the way back, he'll be traveling with a celebrity. Space fans everywhere know the name Sergei Krikalev. This legendary cosmonaut has logged more time up here than anyone, a total of more than 2 years.
You see our commander, Sergei Krikalev, on the treadmill. He's a great person. He has a great sense of humor. He's very modest.
Now we're getting some action.
He's super skilled. I mean, he came in and he just tried to make me feel at home and as comfortable as could be.
Even though they trained relentlessly for this, the new men have to work to adjust to life in space.
Here's the daily planning conference. Just imagine yourself floating. It does feel like magic. You know, how can you float in air? It was a continual highlight. In my sleeping bag.
For the old and new crew members, the 7-day handoff involves countless details.
And Bill MacArthur will become commander of the ISS when we leave.
It's Greg's chance to explore, experiment, and enjoy.
I would get out of my sleeping bag and I go right over to the window and I look out at the Earth and bring one of my cameras and just take some pictures and say, wow. And I never got tired of looking at the Earth and saying, wow. You see a nice picture of the world. Here's the Soyuz that I will return on. Top of the transfer chamber. And on the solar cells, we can see the arm, the robot arm.
On Earth, 10 days have passed since launch. But on the space station, the sun has risen and set nearly 200 times. Greg Olson has circled the globe more than 100 times, a total of nearly 5 million kilometers. He and his companions have formed a special bond. But now it's time to say goodbye.
I had trained with Tokarev and MacArthur 5 months, but the last 2 months very closely. Now I'm leaving these guys behind.
One by one, Greg, Sergei, and John squeeze into the tiny return vehicle.
It's like a movie with 3 parts. At the end of part 2, when you close that hatch, now part 3 is descent. You better get in that thing and get going because it's all on schedule. coming down, there was going to be some rough riding ahead. We had to prepare for it.
The closing of the hatch marks the beginning of any space mission's most perilous chapter, re-entry. About 350 kilometers below, Russian Air Force helicopters fan out across central Kazakhstan. When the capsule touches down, they'll retrieve it. At Mission Control, Vladimir Solovyov and his team prepare to unhook Soyuz from the space station. But there appears to be a problem. As it prepares to cut loose from the International Space Station, the Soyuz re-entry capsule encounters big trouble. Somewhere and somehow, the capsule is losing air.
I saw the pressure was dropping. It was 750-ish, and it was going down, and it got into the 600s. I saw Krikalev watching it carefully.
Vladimir Solovyov has run 100 space flights, but this is a first.
Well, but hold on a minute. Don't do anything without my command.
There's no good time for a space vehicle to leak air, but the risk is greatest during re-entry, as the men at either end of this fragile tether know. On the 29th of June 1971, Soyuz 11 departed the Salyut 1 space station carrying 3 cosmonauts. The return flight seemed to go according to plan, until the final plunge, when the capsule started to leak air. When the cosmonauts were retrieved, they were all dead. Their oxygen had leaked out. Now this Soyuz has also sprung a leak. On Earth and in space, crews try to diagnose and solve the problem. All Greg Olson can do is sit and wait as Sergei tries to create a better seal.
I knew they were working on it. I knew they were in contact with the ground, and I knew probably had the best pilot you could ever have in Sergei Krikalev.
Sergei radios Moscow. It seems he's stabilized cabin pressure. The leak appears to have stopped. It's Vladimir Solovyov's call. He decides to go ahead. The re-entry capsule unlocks from the space station, and the journey home begins. All is well for 2.5 hours as the cosmonauts circle closer to Earth. But as Soyuz hits the planet's atmosphere, the cabin pressure starts to drop again. Before long, 12% of their breathable cabin air is gone. The crew has 2 choices, and both are risky. They can boost cabin pressure using pure oxygen, which is highly flammable, or they can trust their spacesuits. Just then, the radio goes dead. All Mission Control can do is watch, wait, and hope. The retrieval helicopters await instructions. Once they have the capsule's coordinates, they'll take off. The capsule re-enters like a meteor, a blaze of white across the morning sky. No one knows if news of the cosmonauts will be good or bad. As planned, a series of parachutes slow the Soyuz from 900 to just 25 kilometers an hour.
Давление атмосферное в точке посадки 743 миллиметра.
The Soyuz is down. Recovery crews surround the scorched capsule and the massive gouge it has made in the Kazakh desert. A tracking device automatically fires. The hatch is jammed. Finally, the recovery crew can reach for the men inside. One by one, the men in their bulky spacesuits are plucked from the cramped capsule. Sergei Krikalev looks okay. So does Greg Olson. But NASA astronaut John Phillips is barely conscious.
John was really cramped up. He's a big guy.
Phillips is revived with smelling salts. It'll be several days before he's 100%.
John,
The episode triggers what, by historical standards, is a startling admission. A few days later, Sergei Krikalev publicly labels the loss of cabin pressure a serious situation. The margin may have been narrow, and the risks enormous. But a vintage Russian craft made the circuit to and from space yet again. This was Soyuz launch number 814. But for Greg Olson, it was launch number one and only, and a dream come true.
experience of my lifetime.